Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 18th of April 2025. It is my father's birthday when this goes out, so happy birthday, Dad. I'm 78 years old today. I have returned to reclaim the seat that was usurped from me last week by one Dr. Keith Redmond, and I'm glad to be back. And I'm glad that, well, I'm upset that so many of you liked him more than me, and I've clearly got work to do to get back into the audience's good graces and to yours, Sarah. But I will start by saying, as Keith noted is apparently tradition, you're looking bloody well this week.
Thanks. He was insufferable after the comments, as I told you in a message. Insufferable.
Yes.
Well, lots of people liked him. So
yes, I can be insufferable too when people like me. So it's a good job that they don't always a lot of the time. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. Look, we have a lot of stuff to talk about this week. It was a great week for Sarah.
We do.
It was a bad week for Simon Harris. It was a great week for women in space. And it was a good week if you're a Conor McGregor fan, an even better one if you're an Irish Tucker Carlson fan. We'll talk about all that stuff. But the only place to start, given, Sarah, that your kind of go-to signature position on this podcast is how much you don't like the old newfangled women with the penises, to tell us what your reaction was to the UK court suggesting that the newfangled women aren't women at all.
And more importantly, John, haven't been all along. It was
that's harsh.
Great. Well, no, I mean that was the decision, and that they have always been, that the definition of it's not new. It's always been that way. But look, it was a great day for people who feel the way I feel. You know, believe in old-fashioned things like wombs. But yeah, like a long time coming, and a lot of work went into by a lot of people, you know, women who've been lobbying for this for a long time. And ultimately what it boils down to is, you know, you'll see a lot of, I saw RT and a lot of other commentary kind of talking about, you know, how this was bad for trans or whatever. It's never really been about that. It's about the consequences of having no definition for women and what that means for prisons, for, you know, for safe spaces for women, changing rooms, sports, etc., etc., etc. And so it was a really important decision, really welcome. Do I think anybody in Ireland will have the guts to grasp that nettle? Probably not. But it meant a lot to me, meant a lot to a lot of women. I was absolutely delighted with it.
Yeah, I have to say, I wrote a piece on this for Gript yesterday, and I was saying that one of the women who was central to that case is a woman called Marion Calder, who most people won't know, but you'll have probably seen pictures of her by this stage. She was one of the women coming out of the court in triumph. She's a co-founder of For Women Scotland, who took this case. And she and I got, sorry, Mum, if you're watching, blindingly drunk last year at the Battle of Ideas Festival, 2 nights in a row in London. I got to know her. She's a phenomenal woman. She's somebody who got into politics and political activism on this issue, primarily not because she was never a political activist before. She's just somebody who felt this is wrong. This taking away of women-only spaces is completely wrong. I'm going to do something about it because nobody else is. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to organize. I'm going to talk to other women. And, you know, J.K. Rowling obviously backed them financially and in other ways, which was very helpful to them in taking their case. But primarily, I remember being blown away by Marion and her courage, and the fact that, you know, people who aren't involved in these fights do not understand the toll they take. They do not understand the toll it takes on your family when you log on every day and there are people calling you this, that, the other, turf, a bitch, whatever insulting language they're using. And here's she and these women, ordinary women, who took on not only the might of the British state, but also the slightly lesser, but probably more scary might of the Scottish state, because that, like Ireland, is a very tribal society, with the SNP are obviously very, very entrenched, or were at least up until recently. And she and others have taken them on, fought the good fight the whole way to the courts, and got a resounding legal result. And I think as well, although in many years on today, you know, if we happen to have any transgender viewers, and I know there are people out there who are transgender who are hurt in some way by the decision, I think this will be something that they will look back on in future as a good day. Because I think one of the things about the society we live in, if we are to be truly tolerant, and I do want to say this, is that if there is somebody out there who genuinely feels that they're born in the wrong body and genuinely feels that they want to live their life as the opposite sex, then my position has always been good luck to you. And I am happy to maintain what I would describe as the polite fiction that you are who you say you are, up until the point and very strictly up until the point where it impinges on somebody else's basic freedoms. So if you want to wear a dress and go out and change your appearance and change how you're known and ask that I call you Samantha instead of Samuel, you go be my guest, and I'm happy to respect that. But if you start crossing that line and saying, I want to go in and wave my lady penis in a women's dressing room in front of, women, actual ones, I'll say, sorry, that's taking the piss, mate. And I think that's where most people are on this topic. Am I wrong? Or would you go further again?
No, I think that's where most people are. And I think that's roughly speaking where I am. The only issue is that I think I've become more and more radicalized on it over the last few years, because what it boils down to is what you're saying is great, John, but the difference between you and a lot of people is that you have the courage to say what you just said. And what's happened for the last few years is that people, it's become easier to talk about this in the last, say, year or two. But it wasn't easy to talk about it 4 or 5 years ago, and you were called a bigot and whatever. And I really think that a lot of people, most people, kind of have the general view that you or I do. The problem that I have with it is that, and most of the time I think I'm quite fair when I say, I accept that some people can't speak out in public because of their jobs or because of this or whatever. But I do think that anybody who's watching who hears this, who shares these views that you've just said, who believes that you should live your life whatever way you want, but like you're not going to change science and you shouldn't be in the women's changing room, etc., etc., etc. Who's known that to be a truth, who's believed in the science, but because of the frankly bullying and the weight of the machine behind the other side of this, has not had the courage to say anything for the last few years, should look at that decision with, I hope, a little bit of self-reflection and a little bit of shame, because it took women to take it to court, to the Supreme Court, and a small minority of women and a small minority of people who are willing to have the courage to say, if you are born a man, you cannot become a woman. And it took that courage to get us to a legal decision like this. The first one, I appreciate that. While a lot of people sat at home or were willing to, frankly, sacrifice the safety and or the discomfort or the comfort of their wives, sisters and daughters because they're too afraid to speak up.
Yeah, I think, I obviously, as you were talking, I was listening to what you were saying and I was critiquing what I said beforehand, and as I'm sure listeners will have done as well. And I think, there's two sides to this, because one of the things, if you adopt the position that I just adopted, which is basically you have the right to live how you want to live and call yourself what you want to be called, that tolerance, that instinctive and good tolerance, is then weaponized against people, right? So it is, okay, you said, you think I have the right to live as I want. So I can become Joanna and I can start wearing a big frilly blue dress and plaster my face with makeup and insisting that you call me Joanna.
Wear a woman face. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it gets to the point where I decide to go into the changing room and, get the whole kid off and get out there and wander around proudly. And you go, I don't like this. And then that's where you say, but you said you were tolerant of my right to live how I was. And so your initial tolerance is weaponized against you. I think that is the problem. And society has a problem drawing a line.
And the problem was that it was never enough. It was never enough. This, every time you got into a conversation, every time there was a debate about it or whatever, it was never enough to be like, oh, you do what you want. No, you had to believe, you had to use certain speech. You were punished if you said the wrong thing. Like, your speech was mandated. It was never enough to call you Mary. You had to agree that you were a woman, just like me. And you're not. And you're just not.
It's no coincidence, by the way, on this, that an awful lot of these women, the so-called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. I've always just called myself a T, not a radical feminist. I'm a trans exclusionary.
I've never been, I've gotten to the ripe old age of 41 without ever being accused of being a feminist, but I'm definitely a TERF.
No, fair. Labels are labels. But what I'm saying is, it's not a coincidence that a larger, how do I put this without making it sound like a slur, because I don't mean this in any bad way, but a larger proportion of TERFs, shall we say, than the general female population are same-sex attracted lesbian women. Now, why is that? It is because lesbians in particular have been relentlessly targeted by this stuff. And they've actually been attacked on two fronts. So first of all, they've been exposed to this rabid ideology that says if you say you're a woman, you're a woman. And if you say you're a woman who's attracted to other women, therefore you are a lesbian. And therefore you're entitled to. So there's this case in Australia, for example, called Tickle versus Giggle. Sounds ridiculous, but this is a case where a woman who has set up a dating app for lesbian, exclusively same-sex attracted women has that app. It's called Giggle. That's the name of the app. And then there's this person called, I think, Roxanne Tickle, who's a male person who now says they're a woman, who is suing the Giggle app because they tried to exclude him/her from it. And so you have this situation right across the world where lesbians who are same-sex attracted, exclusively interested in women, are now being confronted by former men in their same-sex spaces who say, not only are we lesbians because we are women who are attracted to women, but you should feel bad if you don't sleep with us. You are bigoted if you don't sleep with us. You are bigoted against women. You're not a real lesbian. So that they're being attacked on that one flank. And then on the other flank, there's the other reality, the other really tragic reality, which is that there are an awful lot of young girls who are experiencing same-sex attraction, who are, going through that phase in their life, or maybe it's not a phase. Maybe they're coming to the realization in their life that actually they prefer the company of women to the company of men. And instead of, they used to just be called lesbians or gay women or whatever terminology you want to use. And now an awful lot of them are being told that actually, in fact, if you fancy a woman, you must be a man. And there's an immense pressure on them to transition and mutilate their bodies and all that. So lesbians in particular have gotten the real short end of this particular fight. I think it's important to note that. And that's why it's so important to so many of them. And also why a great many politically lesbian people, and I say politically lesbian as in, I think, people who were previously militant in their sort of pro-LGBT politics from a lesbian perspective, have shifted quite dramatically on this because they have felt themselves being crowded out and put under pressure.
They've gotten the short end of the stick, is what you're saying.
No.
Yeah.
This is a pro-lesbian space.
I think, of course it is. But I think that they're absolutely right. And the arrogance of somebody to go into a lesbian dating app who is a biological male and sue on the basis. I mean, there's no other kind of adult relationship forum where anybody would be so arrogant as to think that they could sue for people not fancying.
I mean, that used to be a bad joke. I used to have a slightly sleazy friend who's sort of opening go-to line in a bar, and this never worked. I mean, it never worked once, but God, he was addicted to the line. And he'd go up to a girl and he kind of go, oh, I'm actually a lesbian trapped in a man's body. It used to be a sleazy pickup line, and now it's an actual lived reality for some of these people. Some actual lesbians are experiencing, which I think says a lot.
Anyway, the point is that there'll be lots of other battles in this, but this was a big win, and it's just been farcical for a long time. And the people who fought really hard and were outspoken about this, like J.K. Rowling and all of the women that you mentioned, they deserve praise for this. It was a big win. They worked really hard. And I think that history will be very kind to them. And like I said, the people who sat at home and, were too afraid to speak truth should feel a little bit of shame.
Of course, we're sitting here and we're having a conversation and like something major has been achieved. And of course, in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, it has been achieved. And if you live north of the border in the United Kingdom and this was important to you, well, congratulations. But if you live south of the border in that former part of the United Kingdom that we now call a republic, nothing has changed at all. The Irish law remains exactly as it was earlier on in the week. And the Irish law is exactly the law against which these people were fighting. And in Ireland, it is the case right now that I can go into the Births, Deaths and Marriages office tomorrow and apply to have my birth certificate changed and a gender recognition certificate issued, which says I am legally and in all respects and for all purposes a woman until the end of time. And I don't have to change a single thing about myself to acquire that. That is the law in Ireland today, was yesterday, will be tomorrow. And that hasn't changed. And I thought it was fascinating that RTE during the week, their coverage of it, which was an absolute fucking disgrace, was basically cringe
for you. Absolutely cringe.
The Transgender Equality Network of Ireland has said that, well, at least this hasn't spread here, Well, first of all, they might as well have just said, thank you, RTE, for not covering it. I know. I mean, because that's the only reason it hasn't spread here, because we have a media that by and large won't air these perspectives. Although, fair play to News Talk, they had Leisha de Bruin from the Countess on, I think, their the hard shoulder during the week talking about it. But by and large, the media only airs these perspectives from one perspective, which is that J.K. Rowling is a monster and all these people are a bit weird for caring about it.
Yes, you're right and no, because as you would often say about other topics that we would often discuss, you would say that laws change culture. And I know it's not our law, but we are very closely culturally aligned with the UK. And I think it is, if you were on the other side of this, so, mad, you would be sitting at home and going, this feels like this is the beginning of a creep in the wrong direction, or as we would say, the right direction now. I think that, I saw David Cullinane from Sinn Féin yesterday wrote a tweet, which he retracted today, but I was really stunned when I first saw it. I don't know if you saw it, where he said that this was a common sense decision. And then today he was like, oh, sorry, I might have hurt somebody's feelings, and kind of retracted it somewhat, not fully, but pretty much retracted it. But the fact that he had the courage to speak his truth yesterday, even though he withdrew today, is a sea change. And I think that culturally over time, we're very influenced by UK, TV shows and different things. I still think this will have an impact on Ireland. Will we have the courage to have the honest conversations immediately? No. But I think over time, the legal precedent that's been set that a woman means a biological female is important and will have a knock-on effect here. It just will.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm 99% sure, you were the lawyer here at the table, but I'm 99% sure that the Irish Supreme Court is obliged to give judgments of the UK Supreme Court they're not treated as legal precedent, but they're given what's called sort of due weight or due accord, because it's a common law jurisdiction like Ireland. And so I don't know what the formal legal term is, but it's something like a judgment of note that should be taken into consideration if and when these issues come before an Irish court. Is that right? And
they would rarely be polar opposite, because there is only two options here. The options are that a woman is a person who is born a female at birth, or it isn't. And so it'd be rare that an Irish Supreme Court decision would be the complete opposite like that on something like this. Could happen. But I think what will happen is this will die down. This will change the culture in the UK, and then slowly but surely, we will get there. I honestly still think, John, that people will look back on this period as a period of madness. I don't think that in 40 years' time, Mary is still, John is still dressing up as Mary and, going into the women's toilets. I think people will look back on this as a period of madness. That,
well, I think if we lived in a country with a country with a sort of normal centre of political gravity, where there was a stronger sort of right influence in Parliament, I think this would be dead already. As it is, what you have is a situation now in Ireland where the only people who actually go out and proactively defend the laws that are on the books, i.e. the Gender Recognition Act, the fact that I can change into a woman legally tomorrow, are the dirtbag left. When I say the dirtbag left, I mean the people, Labour, Social Democrats, Greens, and people for profit. Shinners won't even go there fully because they're a different kind of branch of the left. They have a little bit more of a Republican, that's why you got David Cullinane saying what he said. The centre of gravity, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Independents, not all the Independents, but certainly Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, they just don't want to touch this issue at all. Their objective now is to stick their heads in the sand and make sure they don't get asked about it, not do anything radical, pro the transgenders, but this is critical, anti them either. So what we're going to have is this weird situation now where the government is embarrassed by its own law, doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want any discussion about it. As Pat Leahy in the Irish Times says, the last thing they want is a conversation on what a woman is. He wrote that before Christmas. That's going to be the situation now until somebody manages to bring this to a head in Ireland, but it will come to a head. And then they will all be forced to take a position which they don't really want to take, which is actually this might have gone a bit too far.
And then people will, people like me will not let people like them forget that Regina Doherty, and people in Fine Gael, and people in other parties, Regina Doherty claimed there was 9 genders. These people, women and men, stood up as part of our parliament and said that people who were born in the wrong body that men could be women and women could be men, and without any consideration whatsoever for the consequences for women of what that might mean for their safety, for their sports, for what it was like for a woman to be in prison, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, it'll come, but I won't forget. If you don't have the courage to stand on that, you don't have the courage to stand on anything.
All right. Well, we've done 20 minutes on the old trannies, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that happened this week to move in to get into the podcast. I don't say trannies in a derogatory term. I just mean a general topic, transgender, whatever. Bad old poll for Simon Harris. Fine Gael at 16%. Sinn Féin at, what was it, some ridiculous figure, 26, 27% that they didn't get in the election. Government satisfaction at minus 20 or something. What did you make of it, you being the political anorak that you are?
Well, first of all, I'll get to Fine Gael in a minute, but it's all very well for Sinn Féin to be going up in the poll, but they didn't do much to deserve that. So, what is it with people who are polled and being loving Sinn Féin during the term and not loving them on the polling day? Do you know what I mean?
Well, my theory there. So go ahead.
But they've done nothing except scream and roar about speaking rights in the Dáil. It's not like they've come out of the traps. As we said before on the podcast, massively disappointed with their performance thus far in this Dáil term. They've done nothing. They've changed nothing. They've gone back to type. Nothing interesting, no new ideas, nothing fresh, and a load of screaming and roaring about speaking rights. And then they go up in the poll. That is mystifying to me.
But have you considered one very disturbing possibility, which is that we might have been wrong? What if everyone in the country was actually really animated about the old speaking rights issue? What if Mary and Joe down in Ballinspittle were sitting there going, "Joe, this is an outrage that there's somebody getting 6 minutes of extra speaking time." Well, what if that was the case? What if we just called it wrong? I don't think we did.
Maybe,
for the record,
maybe,
I don't think we did.
So.
I think what happens here in the opinion poll with no election, there's no election. This is the reality in Ireland. If you don't like the government, you had a chance to vote them out of office last November 29th, I think it was. You will not have another chance to express your view on their performance in an election that matters, and the presidential election doesn't, in an election that matters for 4.5 years. That's the reality. They're there for the next 4.5 years. There are no local elections, no European elections, no general election, 4.5 years. And I think in that context, when there's actually no prospect of Sinn Féin getting near power or whatever, I think people are more comfortable of saying to a pollster in that kind of environment, feck it, the Shinners are better than a lot of them. But then I think when an election comes around and it's actually the prospect of putting Pierce Doherty in charge of the national finances and Mary Lou in charge of foreign policy and raising the Palestinian flag at every Irish international embassy and declaring war on Israel or whatever it is that Sinn Féin want to do, I think people take a step back then and go, maybe not. That's what I think.
I think it's just so depressing though, because as a voter, we get worse. We get the two worst ends of the stick there. We get an opposition who get, bonus points for nothing. So it doesn't call them to account in any way on upping their game. And then we get a government who don't care anyway. And then at the last minute, we all change our minds regardless. So they don't have to do anything. So we get zero accountability from anyone.
Yep.
And
I mean, something I have noticed, by the way, I have to say, because obviously I'm in the news business. I have contractual obligation to produce 8 or 10 pieces of content of my own every week, as do my colleagues. You need things to write about. You need stories. And obviously, I'm not complaining. We obviously finding things to write about at Gript. But compared to this time last year, there's feck all news. I mean, this government is doing almost nothing. That's the thing that strikes me is that there are very few initiatives. There's no, last year they had the referendums that they were going to call, and then there was local and European elections, and then there was talk of a big giveaway budget, and all the stuff that there was the hate speech bill. This government doesn't really have even a single signature I nearly said lesbian legislative initiative that you can hang your hat on and say, well, this is a big thing now that we'll be talking about. The Dáil has barely sat. Compared to this time last year, it's sat for a quarter of the days or something. I think it's only been sitting for something like 20 days since we held that election last November. So it's very hard to get a handle on what exactly the government are doing beyond kind of sitting there issuing statements.
Well,
Am I wrong to get that feeling? Do you feel it as a member of the public?
100%. But I'd say they have PTSD from the hate speech bill, was a rope around their neck for over a year, and the public were very much against it, and it was just a real hassle that they're probably afraid of their life to put their head above the parapet on anything like that again.
Yeah, but why does it have to be something like that? I mean, it's like once you take away the woke agenda, once you take away the sort of like the hate speech bill, we're going to extend the abortion laws, we're going to do something to appease the liberals. They don't have any other legislative agenda. And once you take that agenda off them, once you get all the briefings from the government that we're going to roll back a little bit on the woke agenda, all of a sudden they're left with nothing. It's like the emperor has no clothes at all. I mean, there's no criminal justice, big criminal justice reform they could do where they say, we're going to introduce mandatory minimum sentences for child porn, and we're going to really start locking up the rapists. And if anyone attacks an old person in their house, they're going to jail for 6 years. Like, they could get tough on crime. There could be like, we're going to recruit a whole bunch of new Gardaí and, increase their salaries. And by the way, give them truncheons to beat the scumbags off the street of Dublin. There's lots of stuff they could do.
But it seems like once you take away, John.
Yeah.
So many good ideas in there. Hook it to my veins.
Once you start actually taking away the whole kind of like woke nonsense stuff off them, it's like there's not even any bother having the Dáil City. No, why bother having Dáil days?
Simon Harris has been doing very important things with tariffs. They've been saving the day on the tariffs. No, I think you're right. I mean, not a lot of news. I actually saw this thing the other day. I laughed. I thought of you. I don't know how it came up, because there must be something really wrong with the algorithm for me on TikTok or something. But what is the name of the socialist TD, female TD from Castleknock who recently got re-elected?
Ruth Coppinger.
I don't know if why the algorithm would put Ruth Coppinger into my TikTok feed, but it did. But potentially because she, and this is to your point that there's not a lot of news, whatever. And by the way, what I'm about to say, I think it is big news, but I didn't think that she would. And so she basically has a video out at the moment, people can look it up, about the elephants in Dublin Zoo. And so it might have been in my algorithm because elephants are my favourite animal. And I sometimes watch videos of elephants or send them to my dad, and he sends them to me. Sad. But anyway, there was some report done into the treatment of elephants and the lifespan of elephants in Dublin Zoo, and it was really bad. And she's out about this. And, obviously I'm delighted with this. And I also, hell hath frozen over when I'm fangirling Ruth Coppinger on something for sure. But I also thought to myself, what a small, tiny, niche issue for her to be getting involved with. And there must be literally no news.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the government strategy with the opposition has been to do nothing so they can't oppose anything. So it's very funny. I mean, incidentally, on that topic of the elephants in Dublin Zoo, I have some knowledge of that situation, and I think Dublin Zoo is getting a hard time. And I'm big on my animal welfare. Like, there's nobody. I am a complete lefty on the animal welfare, to be honest. But I think they're getting a hard time. They had an outbreak of an awful virus that unfortunately is lethal for elephants. But those elephants, by and large, are well looked after, and their keepers, I know, dote over them. And I know there was heartbreak in Dublin Zoo when they had deaths. And I don't think there's any question of at least deliberate neglect at all. I think, in fairness, I think Dublin Zoo, compared to what it was when I was a kid and brought there, I think it's night and day changed. I think that's to their credit. But anyway, people can have their views on that. Before we move on, Fine Gael, Simon Harris, 16%. I mean, what's your take on that?
I think Simon Harris is going to start to get into a bit of bother soon. But I also think that, we're in a different political cycle, for want of a better word, these days. And I think that the last term, the kind of, like, for want of a better expression, the whipping boy of the government coalition was Fianna Fáil. And Fianna Fáil was consistently down around the 16-17% during the term. And Fianna Fáil was doing worse out of that arrangement than Fine Gael was. And Fine Gael seemed shinier and brighter, and it had kind of, like more, less of the bad portfolios and more kind of fresher feeling about their front cabinet or whatever. And now I think that this term, it's starting to look like that might be just shaping up that's what's going to happen to Fine Gael this time. I don't think it's necessarily going to make a blind bit of difference. The only difference between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil is that I think that Fine Gaelers have more of the mettle to take Simon Harris out if it's not going their way than Fianna Fáil did.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, do they even know what the problem is? But they're just going to blame Simon Harris. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Simon Harris deserves considerable blame for the position in which Fine Gael finds it, because I think he has been one of the architects of their shift into their current disposition, which is basically to become the Democratic Party of Vermont in Ireland over the last.
What is the problem?
15. The problem I think is that, and I said this in a piece on Gript on Thursday, is that Fine Gael went into the last election and they said new energy. Here's our slogan. This is a new energy. We are a fresh, young set of faces. But when you read their manifesto, when you read the Fine Gael manifesto, which I did in full, and you read the Fianna Fáil manifesto, which I did in full, I mean, only that the words were different. You could have put the content of them. It could have been a photocopy. Like they were, the two manifestos had very minor differences on something like 95% of all public spending and priorities. They were agreed. So your new energy, your whole brand is I'm Mr. New Energy, but no, like they didn't even have the ability to put at the end of new energy, new ideas. I mean, that would be the slogan. New energy, new ideas. They couldn't actually put new ideas on the slogan because they ain't got any. They got the exact same ideas they've had for the past 15, 20 years. And I think the problem for Fine Gael is that they have no idea what they want to be and everyone hates what they are. So they've been chasing this sort of, as I say, Vermont, Democratic Party of Vermont approach where we're the people who are very liberal on social issues and quite conservative. You can trust us with the money. But when it comes to the actual social issues, well, anyone who cares about that stuff has got the Social Democrats or Ivana Bacik or the Greens or whoever, Hazel Chu, whoever it is to vote for. And when it comes to the economic issues, you can't tell anyone in the country that you're the party of fiscal rectitude when your own minister for the OPW stands over a whatever 500 grand bus shelter or whatever it was, and when the government is building porta cabins for Ukrainians at 400 grand a pop. You know, anyone who actually cares with fiscal rectitude, they're not into Fine Gael. So what does the party actually stand for now, apart from being Fianna Fáil's bitch? It now exists to prop up the Fianna Fáil government. And you look at their cabinet and you look around the table. I mean, this whole new energy business, so it wasn't even Simon Harris's idea. It was Leo Varadkar who promoted Helen McEntee and Jennifer Carroll McNeil. And what is the new energy? And those two women are not the same. I'm not implying that they're the same at all. I think one is clearly a superior performer than the other. But I think if your new energy is kind of like, you know, the same crappy performance, but with younger, better looking people ain't going to be that inspired.
But the thing is, John, that what you're describing there being Fianna Fáil's bitch, I would have said that in the last term, there was an element of Fianna Fáil being Fine Gael's bitch. And that what's changed is that Leo is gone and Simon Harris has come in. So there is a hierarchical change or shift between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that has happened exclusively under Simon Harris's watch.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I definitely think it looks like Micheál.
And so I think that if you're a member, like I live in Malahide. I mean, Keith and I, Alan Farrell used to be the Fine Gael TD here. Keith and I used to talk about how he was a guaranteed seat for life. He lost his seat. There's no Fine Gael TD here. Like, that is unbelievable.
Fine Gael have fought three elections under Simon Harris. They fought the local elections, they fought the European elections, and they fought the general election. And they lost. They didn't lose seats in the general election because there were more seats overall. So they took a smaller slice of a slightly bigger pie, which meant they got slightly more actually, but they lost vote share. And in the other two elections, they lost seats and vote share. So he's got into three elections and Fine Gael have gone backwards in both of them as the new leader. That's not a very impressive performance. And here's the thing, I genuinely believe he has given it his best shot. I genuinely believe that.
But isn't that so? But why are Fianna Fáil? What's attractive about Fianna Fáil? Like, what's the shift been? That Fianna Fáil is a Micheál Martin? Is it like, does Micheál Martin just seem more competent than Simon Harris? I think so.
My opinion on this, I wouldn't, as people know, support either party. But like, we are headed into, and this gets into some of what you and my annoyingly able replacement were discussing last week. We are getting into this kind of period of global turmoil. I mean, not even the biggest Trump supporter in the world, and I know I'm not that. How many times last week did you say I had Trump derangement syndrome? By the way, it was like 12. But I'm not his biggest fan. But I think even his biggest fans would admit that he has been a driver of global instability. If you're his fan, you say the system needed shaking up. It's great that somebody's like rocking the boat a bit. We were too comfortable. If you're not his fan, you say this is reckless. But even his fans would admit we're in a position of global instability, and Ireland, as a small little open economy, is very at risk of that. So if that's happening, do you want new energy, or maybe do you want steady old Micheál, who's been in cabinet since about 1954, with his hand on the tiller, knowing who to call and what relationship to press in the EU and how to get support? I think a lot of Fianna Fáil's present support is not about deputies Timmy Dooley and Cormac Devlin, fine men though they may be. I think it's about Micheál Martin seems a little shoulder above the rest of the political class in terms of his ability to run the country. I genuinely think that's what it is.
No, I totally agree with that. Like, I have my, disagreements with Micheál Martin and lots of things that he thinks, but like, Micheál Martin definitely feels like your kind of stable uncle who's coming in to run the show, and Simon Harris kind of feels like your 33-year-old virgin cousin who's never seen a woman naked in real life. Do you know what I mean?
I just know that Simon Harris is a happily married man with several children. So
I said it's an analogy, but like, he's kind of nerdy and a bit kind of cringy, and like, it just hasn't really worked. It hasn't captured the imagination in the way that he wanted it to from the very beginning. And I think that while I'm sure he is competent on some level, I don't think, I think the impression I think that he gives now is that Fine Gael are settling down to the business of, being the second, and running the country. He's settling down to the important business of being the Taoiseach and all that kind of good stuff. And it sounds great or whatever, but it doesn't sound like he's giving any thought whatsoever to the rebuild of Fine Gael. And that, I think, will be a problem for him with his own party in the next 6 months to a year.
The biggest problem for him, though, is that his brand is shattered. His brand is utterly shattered. I mean, why did he get the job? Simon Harris got the job because Fine Gaelers looked to him and they said, and by the way, there's a lot of people in Fine Gael who had issues with Simon Harris. They would have said that, shall we say, I'll say this in a nice way, that a lot of leaks from the cabinet would have appeared to support his positions or whatever. There's been a lot of accusations that he was a self-promoter, but none of them denied. This was the thing on which they all agreed. He's a brilliant communicator. And I mean, I think I was on this podcast last year when he got elected saying, in fairness, you don't like him, he's a brilliant communicator. He
came out really strong.
Yeah. And then he goes and he meets that woman in Cork in the shopping centre, and he detonates his own political party's election campaign, and he also detonates everyone's image of him, which was as a really nice guy. It actually turned out he's just a ratty little man who was having a bad day. And that detonated the public image of him. So I think, look, and the other thing is he has nothing to fall back on. He doesn't have a record of achievement to fall back on. He doesn't have a record of accomplishment to fall back on. I remember writing a piece that I've often felt bad about writing because it was a little bit mean when he was appointed Minister for Health, because, full disclosure, I knew Simon Harris quite well many years ago and would know him on first name terms today. But I felt a little bad writing it. But I said, when he was appointed Minister for Health, if he had taken himself down to the local super value and applied to be manager of that super value, he wouldn't have gotten the job, because they would have said, you are not qualified. You do not have the qualifications to run super value. And yet there we had decided as a country and electorate to put him in charge, first of all, of the health ministry, which is a larger budget than NASA, and secondly, of the entire country as Taoiseach, even though he objectively lacks the management qualifications to run a local supermarket. And therefore, he's got nothing to fall back on. He's got no reserves of expertise. It's not like, for example, and I'll give you an example of somebody here. It's not like when Michael McDowell was really unpopular, and the Progressive Democrats would go down in the polls, and then they'd be out of office, and people would kind of go, oh, well, you know what, Michael McDowell, say what you like about him. He's a really good lawyer. He knows his stuff. We might put him back into office. Or when Fine Gael were in trouble during the Enda Kenny government, where people would say, Michael Noonan, very capable Minister for Finance, even though I don't like him because of the Bridget McCole stuff and all that, capable Minister for Finance. What does Simon Harris have that you can fall back on beyond he's good on TikTok? Fuck all is the answer, I think. And I don't think I'm being harsh. Am I?
No, not at all. I don't really disagree with anything you're saying there. But what if you were, you're a journalist. So, in Irish culture, there's probably a 95% chance you end up in a job as a special advisor to somebody in government. If you were, if hell froze over and you left Gript and you went in day one as an advisor to Simon Harris tomorrow, what would you even do?
Now, first of all, an awful lot of people in my replies on social media these days, because I'm a little bit skeptical of the American administration and Conor McGregor and all that sort of stuff, seem convinced that I've done that deal already. I'll have you know that I'm off. I'm out of Gript. I'm going to the Irish Times. I'm going to work for the government. Something like that. Just for the record, it's not true. I'm staying where I am. I'm very happy where I am. I would have to move to Dublin, which I have no desire to do. Have you seen the state of it?
Thanks, Tom.
What would I advise? No, it's not really tough. You don't live in Dublin. You live in Malahide. It's basically a whole different. I think they actually import the air into Malahide to make it leafier, don't they? But what would I advise Simon Harris and Fine Gael to do? I think they're not going to listen to me, but I would say pick one or two issues in which you're going to be distinctive. You've got the Ministry for Health in Jennifer Carroll McNeil. What are you going to do with it? Like, what is your central policy that is Fine Gael policy that can actually address the problems in the health system? She's in Minister for Health now for 4 months, and I haven't heard a single thing from her as to what she's going to do that was different from Stephen Donnelly. And I think I would focus on those ministries where I've got somebody in charge, and I would actually do sort of a series of policy launch events where I say, this is what we are going to do in health. This is what we are going to do in, I don't need to say about education, don't I? In education, this is what we're going to do in social protection. And this is how it's different to what the last government did, and this is why we're going to do it. On a very simple communications level, identify things that the government is going to do that are Fine Gael policies that you are going to fight for and lead through your department. And have Harris standing there with the ministers. A simple kind of, this is what we're going to do. Like, that is not a question, an answer that, I know there are people in the comments who think the answer to the question is, I'm going to shut down all the immigration centres and deport a load of people. Well, fine, I'll do that too. But assuming that that's not something that the Fine Gael party is willing to do, purely communications perspective, that's the answer to your question.
I think Micheál is very good at the kind of soft interview as well. And I think Simon Harris could do better at that. I think that a bit of personality, maybe he just doesn't have the ability to do that kind of interview that Micheál does, but Micheál does a good, soft interview on the Late Late Show kind of thing.
Well, I wouldn't be watching if you did. No interest in the Late Late Show. Let's move on. We talked enough about bloody politicians. Anyway, I want to get on to the bit of the show I really wanted to get to, because something amazing happened this week, folks, which is that every week before this show goes to air, Sarah and I will have a quick phone call at 1:00 in the afternoon. We might exchange a few texts. What are we going to talk about? What are our topics of the week going to be? And this week, for the first week ever, she sent me one of my own articles. And I was so pleased because, I didn't even know, Sarah, you read anything I wrote. You sent me one of my own articles and you wanted to talk about it. You wanted to talk about the piece I wrote about Luigi Mangione and how in the United States, this is the guy, Luigi Mangione. He's a young guy who got very angry about the cost of his health insurance, and he decided to do something about it by shooting a health insurance executive.
Executed somebody in the street. Yeah.
And now basically you've got a legion of young American women on TikTok and elsewhere, mainly of the left, who are basically saying that not only is he innocent, but they want to marry him and have all his babies. And I thought that was interesting, and I wrote an article about it. And you thought you wanted to talk about it. And I didn't even ask you what you wanted to say. So you'll break my heart if you tell me that you thought it was a terrible article.
No, I don't. I wanted to bring it up because I think it was a good article, and I think it's a good point. And I was struck by the fact that you were describing how, there's a narrative that violence is a disease of the right, we'll say, and really that's gaslighting, and that the left can be just as violent as the right, and there's no monopoly on violence. As for the women who want to marry him and whatever, there's just no end to the dumb sometimes. He executed somebody in the street for working in a company that he didn't like. And I know that people will comment and say, but the health service this and health insurance that in America, whatever. Sorry, but you don't get to execute people you don't like in the street. And they all want to marry him and have his babies. They all want to marry him and have his babies. Luckily, he will probably be in prison for 100 years. So
I'll tell you, if he looked like what I looked when I was his age, they wouldn't be wanting to marry him and have his babies. It's not just a purely political thing. He's a tragic, brooding figure with the dark hair and the eyebrows and the square jawline.
So was Ted Bundy.
Fair enough. Women wanted to marry Ted Bundy as well.
I know, and they're gobshites too.
Yeah, but I guess what I was talking about in the article, you're right, is that every time we have a European terrorism report or one of these security reports, it's that we're so concerned about the rise of far-right violence and extremism. But actually, if you look at the record of history, and not even like deep in the past history, the political violence tends to come from and be justified by the left. On our own island, nobody ever blew up a British Army barracks for the cause of a 32 county free economy with civil rights and low taxes for all. It was always for a 32 county socialist republic. No one ever wore a T-shirt in Ireland with Augusto Pinochet on the front, but plenty wear T-shirts with Che Guevara on the front. If you go to a pro-Palestinian march in Dublin, when they say intifada, revolution, there is no whatever peaceful solution, or they talk about their resistance, they're not talking about signing petitions. I mean, the left is very comfortable with political violence in the right context. And it's very interesting that in the United States, so many young people are very comfortable with this guy's political violence towards an innocent billionaire health executive.
But I think that what that is a symptom of the fact that for a very long time, people on that side of the political spectrum, we'll say, have gotten very comfortable with having a very shallow, unthinking level of understanding of most things. And they're never questioned on it. They're never challenged on their beliefs. You know, not to go back to another topic, but, you know, I saw a couple of trans activists being interviewed. One, and I'm not going to remember it, but people can Google it. Today, Thursday or Wednesday, maybe it was yesterday, a trans activist being questioned on BBC, I think it was. And she said she was having a panic attack and walked off because she's being challenged on her views. And this is the thing that, like, there's a lot on the left who just haven't really been challenged. So when they sit around and they say, oh, he's so dreamy and he's just a hero and whatever, like, no one has really challenged them or told them that they're just morons.
That is true. And I also think, because I'm going to roll this into another topic I wanted to talk about, I also think, now I'll say now this, even though I risk getting in trouble, there's a problem with the American woman. There just flat is a problem with the American woman. I became convinced of this week when I watched the Amazon, whatever it's called, Blue Horizon penis rocket that sent the 4 women to space, and then they came back, and that was all grand insofar as it goes. Why are you covering your face? It did, because
I just think it's desperately unfair. It's desperately unfair of you to say, I have a problem with the American woman, and then bring up the dumbest thing that women have done in years and make me defend it. I can't.
I'm not making you defend it. Anyway, they came back, having gone into to space on their penis rocket. They came back, they land, they get out of the capsule/head thing. And it's not that they went to space and that Katy Perry sang songs, although now I know why they all wanted to come home so quickly. It is that once they got out there, they came out with this kind of quasi-religious pablum like I've never heard before in my life. It wasn't, that was an amazing experience. It was an incredible thing that I'll always remember in my life, to have looked down on Earth from a height. No, it was literally putting your arms at this and going, I just felt so wrapped in love. Well, whose love? Space does not have feelings. Like, whose love? What are you talking about? It's not it's quasi-religious language. It's the, we should all, this really inspires me to love the earth more. How many of these American women, and it is predominantly an issue with American liberal women, disproportionately white American liberal women, just constantly keep talking in these new age terms of new age spirituality that just makes them sound dumb. Like, I'm sorry, I'm very pro-woman guy, but like, why do you think there's so much of that about? I mean, it's baffling to me. I think it's baffling to a lot of men. And I think a lot of people are kind of, it's actually driving misogyny is the wrong word, but it's driving a lot of the polarization of the sexes, the way particularly American white liberal women seem to speak a different language to the rest of the human population.
Including other women, John. So, like, yeah. I'm a woman and I don't...
Well, that goes without saying.
I just watched that space thing and the cringe was intense and deep. It was the photos of them all in the matching kind of suits and the posing and it was just a nonsense. It was like a 15-year-old girl has written a comic that came to life. It was completely absurd and stupid, a waste of time. And I'm, if you and I had grown up together, we may have met in space camp if we'd grown up in America, as opposed to in Ireland, which didn't have, and as far as I'm aware, still doesn't have space camp. But apparently in America, there's a camp you can go to that's called space camp. And I definitely would have wanted to go there had I been living in America. And so you're a space nerd as well. So I don't know how they've managed to get 5 women to go, or whatever amount of women to go on a female-only space trip and still make it crap and boring and cringe. Just the whole thing. And as you say, just a bit mad. Like Katy Perry coming down and talking about love and coming out of the spaceship. Just all a bit. Are you all quite well, really? You know? And I don't like to do the kind of, you know, there are children starving thing, you know, to everything, because a lot of people do that. You know, you say, oh, we're doing this, and then they say, well, what about this? And I don't really like that. But at the same time, you know, as you pointed out a few minutes ago, there is a bit of turmoil in the world at the moment, to use your point. There is, you know, some issues and some conflicts and some different things. And this just felt a bit tone deaf and a bit silly and talking about love, and just sing your songs, Katy Perry, and shut up.
Yeah, but I agree. So look, we've 2 topics left that we said we get to, but we're actually running out of time because we want to keep the good people for more than an hour. And besides, I got to figure out what's happening in the Man United and Leon match. Probably something terrible. You'll all know by this. You want to talk something to do with adults and ADHD?
Yeah. So there was RTE did a piece about adults being diagnosed with ADHD, and it's very topical at the moment. And I would often on this podcast give out about different aspects of our health service, waiting times for this, the Children's Hospital, etc. And that I stand over all of that. But I was just really struck by the fact that sometimes there is a level of accountability we should take for ourselves and our own clogging up of waiting lists and nonsense. And this TV show, and I've heard a few things on the radio in the last week, is about adults getting diagnosed with ADHD. And I don't really want to disparage anybody else's lived experience, as the cool kids say. But if you are... So Keith and I, for the laugh, did some of these online tests for ADHD a year or 2 ago. And both of us, me in particular, came out as particularly high, you know, ADHD symptomatic. For nonsense things that you and I have kind of discussed that we both have. I leave cupboard doors open. I can't lose concentration. I mean, basically things that a huge proportion of adults have. And I think that the ADHD thing is part of pathologizing personality quirks that people have. And I noticed these people on RTE talking about how they suffered this and they suffered that in school, and this has all been made clear to them now, and they're 28. But so what? You're 28. You got through school. What's being achieved by this, except that people are now creating massive queues to get these diagnoses that are somehow self-validating. And I'm just really beginning to formulate not a strong opinion, but a moderate opinion that
a lot of these mental health conditions are fake. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and these kind of nonsense diagnoses are the new thing where people slot in where the personality should be.
Yeah, well, I don't care. I think a lot of these conditions are fake. I'll take the strong position. And I'll give you an example of why in relation to the example you're using of ADHD. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? And how does it present itself? What are the most diagnosable traits of it? It's an inability to focus. And so you're going to notice in kids because they're losing attention in class, they're being disruptive, they can't stay focused on the lesson. Now, I remember we used to be told when we were in school that classes were 40 minutes long, because almost the maximum a person can focus on a single thing is about 30 minutes without a break. And a 40-minute class gave you a 5-minute intro, a 5-minute exit, and 30 minutes to work out. And I think we now have people who find that shock horror. They're sitting in an office job somewhere and they've got a spreadsheet in front of them of the most boring work shit impossible you can imagine. And instead of focusing on it, they're going on YouTube videos to watch Katy Perry talking about going back in the spaceship in a penis rocket. And then their boss is saying, why haven't you got that done? And they're like, oh, well, I just couldn't focus on the really boring job I've got. I must have something wrong with me. And then, of course, it's ADHD. I think there's a lot of that. And I'm not saying, for the record, I'm not saying that there are no genuine cases of conditions like this. But I think people are so eager to pathologize themselves these days to be special. I'm not just a lazy git. I've got something wrong with me. I'm not just in bad form. I am depressed. I am not just, and I think, ties into the whole transgender discussion we had at the start as well. Yeah. I'm not just a lesbian. I'm actually a bloke. There's so much of this about it. And I think, we've far too many psychiatrists. That's my opinion.
Well, according to the internet and the criteria and the different personality traits that supposedly indicate that you might have ADHD, I think I got some kind of 98 percentile. And things that I do that Keith doesn't understand, like I will drive the car with the petrol light on until it's an absolute emergency. I will drive the car when
you're just like every other woman in the world on that.
There are multiple emergency lights on the dash. I don't know what any of them mean, and I don't care. I will never know how much money is in my bank account and always be surprised by the figure if I ever check the balance. All these kind of like things that Keith is like, these are so weird. But when you actually go on to these kind of tests, they're all signs of ADHD. But the point is, who cares if I do or not? I'm 41. What difference does it make? I got through school. Do I find it hard to concentrate sometimes? Yeah, doesn't everyone? And probably part of the reason why I might find it hard to concentrate at times is because I fried my brain watching my phone too much, Look. So, but the point is that what is the point of an adult diagnosis other than to give you something that makes you feel more interesting than other people?
People know I write articles for the website daily that are like 800 to 1,000 words. Sometimes if I'm feeling very lazy, I might go below 800 words, but it's generally 800 words, 800 to 1,200 words. Like I have never been able to write one of those in one sitting. I will start with an opening paragraph, then I'll go and have a cup of tea, then I'll see what they're saying on Sky News, then I might take the dog out to pee, then I'll come back and write another 3 paragraphs. I'll get the job done, and I'll get it done reasonably quickly. But it is just hard to focus on things for me. I don't think that's makes me abnormal at all. I think most people are like that. I think you start pathologizing normal human behavior. The only people who make money are the psychiatrists and the therapists. And by the way, again, proviso, some people have real difficulties. But I also like to know why it is suddenly so popular and essential to have something wrong with you. It's like a whole country has Munchausen's by proxy syndrome,
Yeah, I know. And so what? So what if you do? So what if you do? Again, like I've said before, your sexuality, your mental health disorder that you've been diagnosed with, like ADHD, is the least interesting thing about you. And I think that there is a generation or two of people who maybe it's because of a lack of adversity or lack of challenge or whatever, or could be a whole load of things, I don't know, but just feel like they need these extra bits to make them interesting. And they're clogging up, it seems like they're beginning to clog up waiting lists when there are genuine people who need, a genuine person who needs to speak to a psychiatrist or get a diagnosis of depression or whatever should not be waiting in line behind Joanne, who decided when she was 24 that she didn't want to do her job anymore and now wants to be able to tell all her mates that she's got ADHD. That's not right.
The other thing I've noticed as well, by the way, is the number of people now in adulthood who will say things about themselves like, oh, I think I was always a little bit on the autism spectrum. Have you noticed that? Have you encountered that? People who will kind of diagnose themselves a little bit. I suppose we all self-diagnose to some degree. We all identify. I would say, I would point to several kind of psychological traits I have that I would say will be good or bad or whatever. But I've noticed a number of people
I could definitely point out at least 10 that you have that are not.
Thank you, sir. But I don't think I'm on the spectrum. But there are a great many people who almost say about themselves, oh, I think I was always a little bit on the spectrum, or I think I had this condition that wasn't really diagnosed, or
But even if you went to a doctor, John, right? If you decided tomorrow that perhaps you are, okay, and you went to a doctor, psychologist, psychotherapist, whatever, and they diagnosed you definitively with one of these things, so what? You're 40. You're
I'm 41
functioning
now, actually. 41.
Sorry, you're 41. You're functioning. You're married. You have a house. You have a job. What's the point of it? Other than more identity capital to tell your friends about.
Well, I'd be special, wouldn't I? Be special. You'd like me more, would you, if I had something wrong with me?
I couldn't like you more.
All right, we'll leave it there.
No, you have to mention. You have to mention really quickly about our visitor from America, because people will get upset that you don't.
Well, I was going to deal with that. I was going to say that, we said at the outset of the show that we would talk about Conor McGregor and Tucker Carlson. And obviously we haven't gotten to it. Maybe because Sarah took up the whole show talking about her favourite topic of the old transgenders. And that ate into all the time. I don't think I will have an extended conversation about it now, Sarah, for the simple reason that Tucker Carlson has obviously interviewed Conor McGregor, and that interview has not been published yet. And so we'll probably be talking about it next week anyway, when that interview is released, and we'll go into it in great depth. I will say a lot of people got quite annoyed with me this week, and a lot of people were very proud of me on either side for saying that I thought it was generally a bad idea for a reasonably popular anti-immigration movement in Ireland to associate itself so prominently with these two gentlemen. I can discuss that in more detail next week as well. But I just don't think people have been watching and listening to us for an hour, and it's not fair to ask them, I think, to listen anymore this week. So we might.
Well, the interview is imminent. We'll talk about it next week then.
We will. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us and for listening to me and Sarah, as you do every week. And thank you for listening to Sarah and Keith last week. And thank you to Keith for stepping in my absence, which I greatly appreciate. And he was a more than capable co-host, as I'm sure he is a more than capable husband. So that was, and it was great to see him as well. So thank you to Keith. We will be back next week for another edition. I will be here. Sarah will be here. We'll probably have that Conor McGregor and Tucker Carlson interview to discuss. So keep it here. Same bat day, same bat channel. Take care. Have a great weekend. Oh, and by the way, happy Easter.